stories that connect us to ourselves and each other. These stories reveal who we are and show us the many vivid, wild colors of our truth. Welcome to Soul Wanderings, where we raise spiritual awareness and foster connections through these shared stories and personal experiences. And now, exclusively on KGRA Radio, I give you your host for Soul Wanderings Radio. Here's AJ.
Hello, hi, it's Soul Wanderings night. So happy to have you here with us live for yet another wandering. Soul Wanderings is heard here on KGRAradio.com every Wednesday from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern, and we get to wander with a new guest each week about their authentic journey through this human experience. I am AJ Rasmussen. I'm an owner of a heart-centered healing space called Vibes Mind Body Spirit, and it's there where I get to assist others in matters of the mind, the body, the spirit, and the heart. And I am also your host of Soul Wanderings. Hello, Wanderers. Welcome, welcome. I am so happy to be back this week. Last night was one night that I was not live out of this whole time, but I was in Tucson enjoying the amazing gem show that they take over the whole entire town with. It was a really amazing experience, and I would really highly recommend anyone who's into crystals or museum pieces or metaphysical or gems of any kind to check the show out. It happens annually. It's about a month long, and it was just such an incredible experience. But I did miss wandering, of course, so I'm so happy to be back tonight with you live. If you guys are listening in on your phone or computer, hop over to the chat room. I am hanging out there and would love for you to be there with me and the other wanderers. You can do that by going to kgraradio.com/chat. Our chat room is a space where you can visit with the other wanderers throughout the show. And of course, you can ask our guest questions. If you do happen to have those questions, make sure you type them all in caps so I can see them easily. And I'll do my best to grab them as time allows me to do so. All right, Wanderers, let's get this show going. I'm excited for this one. Tonight, we are wandering with the author of Never Binge Again. He's a veteran psychologist who has spent several decades researching the nature of binging and overeating via work with his own patients and a self-funded research program with more than 40,000 participants, including researching and overcoming the binging himself. So I'd like to welcome our guest tonight, Glenn Livingston, to the show. Hello, Glenn.
Hi, AJ. Looking forward to talking to you.
Thank you. We're happy to have you here. We have all types of guests on Soul Wanderings. Never have we had a guest like this. So it'll be nice.
You mean you've never had a guest who was 6'4" with a beard before?
Yeah, exactly. That's
what you meant.
That's what I meant. I meant like in the research of any kind of eating behaviors or mind behaviors in this regards at all. So
I know what you meant.
This will be good. And I think a lot of people will relate to it because we all have at one time or another overeaten or eaten through our emotions, you know. So once we get to that point in the show, we can't wait to hear all about it. But first, as always, I like to get to know our guest on a personal level. So let's talk about you.
I'd be more than happy to do that. What would you like to know?
Anything. So, first of all, tell me about Glenn. Who is Glenn right now? Like, who are you?
You know, I've been wondering that myself a little bit lately. I got divorced a couple of years ago. I moved around the country a little bit. I'm settling into a really nice condo on the beach in Florida, in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. and I am discovering more time with myself than I previously had, more time alone, kind of enjoying it. And I love dogs and cats, and I like to help people. From the time I was a very little boy, I heard my dad on the radio, and I asked my mom, I was 4 years old, I asked my mom, why is dad on the radio? And she said, well, because he's a psychologist and he likes to help people. And I said, what does a psychologist do? And she said, he makes people happy when they're sad. And I said, I want to do that. And I want to do it on the radio too, so that I can make a lot of people happy when they're sad. And ever since that time, that's kind of what I wanted to do. And I didn't want to do it in the traditional way so much that all the other psychologists in my family did, because there are 17 of them, 17 therapists. And I wanted to be more than a country doctor. I wanted to really help the masses with psychoeducation. And I got a long series of time in marketing and studying this and studying that, and a bunch of very painful failures along the way also. But I finally figured it out, and that's what I do now. I feel like I'm doing the most meaningful work I ever did. And I wake up every day feeling blessed that I get the opportunity to help these people with a problem that I suffered from tremendously for almost 30 years. So that's who I am. That's what I do.
What a meaningful existence. I love that. So you said there's 17 of you in the family who all deal with psychology.
There are. The standing joke is that if something breaks in the family, we all know how to ask it how it feels, but nobody knows how to fix it. So, yeah, no, my mom and my dad and my sister, my sister's husband, both of my parents' spouses, they're divorced. My grandparents, my uncles, my aunts, my cousins, even my grandmother, everybody you can imagine in the family is a psychotherapist of some sort. Mm-hmm. And it was a very interesting childhood, very soulful family to grow up in. And it's a very good life. Being a psychologist, if you really embrace it, is a really good life. It's, I think, was it Plato or Socrates that said an unintrospective life is not worth living, or a non-reflective life is not worth living? And so I was brought up to believe that soulful reflection was the highest value in life. And I still do. I still do.
That's wonderful. What was dinner like when you brought a guest home with you?
So you should know that there are different types of psychologists. And so the kind of psychologist that I am is different than the kind that my dad is or my mom is. And the kind of psychologist my dad is today is different than the kind of psychologist he was in the 70s and 80s. So in the 70s and 80s, they were very involved with Gestalt therapy and psychotherapy marathons and a lot of very intense emotive stuff. And what I had to worry about bringing people home was that it could be a little too intense for them. Mm-hmm. So, if I had a date, they would ask them, well, what did they really mean by that? And how do they feel about that? And they would expect these answers, which were coming from the depths of their soul. And sometimes my date just wanted to talk about the latest Godzilla movie. So I had to be a little careful, and I had to prep them beforehand. Yeah. But mostly people found my family very interesting. And, and people, sometimes I had to worry that they wanted to be more friendly with my mom and my dad than they did with me, because they were so engaging. My parents practiced at home also. So there was not only my parents at home and my sister at home, but all of these patients were coming in and out of the house. And before their sessions, they would sit with us in the kitchen. We'd have some bagels and lox and coffee. So there were always all these really interesting, deep conversations in the kitchen. And, I played the piano. I wanted to be a jazz musician back then. And so people would come and want to hear me play. And I had I could tell you all kinds of ways that my upbringing was traumatic, but the truth is I was pretty spoiled. I grew up in with a nuclear family in a wealthy area of Long Island, and I didn't really want for much, and I had lots of interesting friends and experiences, and what was harder for me was going out on my own. What was harder for me was recognizing that the whole world wasn't like that, and not everybody was safe to talk to about your deepest feelings, and having to develop more of a toughness and a mental shell, and to be able to take a lot of the pain that's actually out in the world. In some ways, I had the antithesis of the harshness that a lot of people say you grew up with, and sometimes I think I miss some of that. Sometimes I think that could have made my life a little bit easier if I had a little more adversity at home growing up. But hindsight is 20/20, and I'm really, really grateful for the parents that I had.
It sounds like an incredible upbringing. There are so many people that I know of, including myself, where you grow up not talking about your feelings because that makes you vulnerable and weak. And so the opportunity that you had to actually speak about how you feel is that I feel like it's quite a blessing for you.
Yes, that it was not in my house where you couldn't talk about your feelings. It was just the opposite. Yeah, that's true. I'll tell you a funny story. When I was 16, all my friends were going to get cars. And my dad said I could get a car or I could go see a psychotherapist. He would pay for me to go see a psychotherapist. And I wanted to go see a psychotherapist because in my family, that was not something you did because you were nuts. That was something you did that was an honor. And he had sat me down before that and said, Glenn, if you want to work things out in life, get into therapy. If you really want to work things out, become a therapist. And so I wanted to see a shrink. That was my favorite thing to do when I was 16 years old. So that gives you a flavor for the kind of family that I was brought up in.
Yeah, but if that was an honor to you, then that's wonderful that you had that experience.
Yeah, we were weird with food, though. We had a really weird relationship with food in the family, but everything else was very, very deep and loving and introspective.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. I love hearing about how people were brought up and seeing the type of human they are as an adult and the factors that contributed to their behaviors now. So,
welcome to the wonderful world of psychology then.
Yeah. Well, I'm fascinated by it, definitely.
Yeah.
Did you always know that this is what you wanted to do when you grew up, to be a psychologist?
I knew I wanted to be a psychologist. I didn't want to work with food. I wanted to be a couples therapist, and that's what I did for a lot of years. I had a large couples and family practice on Long Island, and I wound up working with a lot of suicidal adolescents, and I worked with a lot of couples after an affair. I think there's a bed echo on the phone at the moment. No, it's gone now. Are you still there?
I am.
Yeah.
I'm not hearing that same echo.
Okay, good. Okay. I don't hear it anymore. So, yeah, from the time I was 4 years old, I wanted to make people happy when they were sad. And I studied to be a couples therapist. And I saw hundreds of couples when I was on Long Island and hundreds of families. And that was very meaningful work. That was very, very meaningful time in my life. This is more meaningful working with binge eaters to me, but it was very valuable. And it was something that taught me a lot about what I wanted in my own life. I thought if I worked with enough couples and I saw the ins and outs of what made a relationship work, that I'd be able to make that work myself. So yeah, it was something I always wanted to do,
So,
but not with binge eating.
I was going to ask, how did that transition take place from helping others through marriage counseling and depression and those sorts of things over to the eating behaviors?
I actively referred out people that had eating problems almost entirely. Once in a while, I'd have a couple that was very attached to me, and one of them would have an eating problem, and I would work with them about it. But I wasn't particularly good at it because I had a problem myself until I started to solve it in the later years. So But just give you a little history of my personal eating. It's a little nutty. My mom was overwhelmed when I was young. Her father had just gotten out of prison, and my father was a captain in the Army, and they were talking about sending him to Vietnam. I was born in 1964. And so there were a lot of shortcuts where she just didn't have the time to, cook and feed me and do what maybe some traditional parents would do. And she was working also. And so breakfast for me would be a big box of chocolate Pop-Tarts. And every morning there was a new fresh box of chocolate Pop-Tarts, and I'd eat the whole box. And lunch would be a big box of sugar pops. And then for dinner, we usually had some type of spaghetti or I don't think we had a vegetable until we were 16 or 17 years old. And I wasn't fat. I mean, there was one short point in my early childhood that I was a little chubby, but basically I'm a big guy. I'm 6'4". I'm reasonably muscular, and so I could get away with eating an awful lot. As a matter of fact, when I was an adolescent, I figured out that if I could work out for 2 or 3 hours a day, that I could eat whatever I wanted to. I mean, I could have 6,000 or 7,000 calories, and that could be boxes of muffins, boxes of chocolate bars, boxes of pizza. It was, I thought it was great. I thought it was great fun because I didn't have any problems with it back then. My digestion was great. I had lots of energy. I spent an awful lot of time eating, an awful lot of time recovering from what I ate, but it wasn't really a problem. When it became a problem was when I was 22 or 23, and I was married, and I had all these responsibilities. I had patients. I had to commute 2 hours each way, and I didn't have the time to work out anymore. And I found that the foods had a hold of me. It's like they had a life of their own, almost like I was looking for love at the bottom of a bag or a box or a container. And I just got fat. I just got fatter and fatter and fatter, not in a straight line. I would, because I went to Overeaters Anonymous, and I lose weight for a while, then I get a lot worse. And I went to some of the best psychologists and psychiatrists around. As you can imagine, from my family in New York, I knew a lot of them. And I took medication, and I did all of this soul searching, which I don't regret. I think it had a big mark on my character, and it shaped who I became. And it was very soulful work. And I learned things that were helpful along the way, but it didn't really solve the problem. The problem just seemed to progress and get worse. And I know now that the reason it was getting worse was because essentially I was going at it from the wrong paradigm. I was thinking that there must be a hole in my heart, and I'm trying to fill up the hole in my heart by eating. And there was a hole in my heart, but that's not what was causing the problem. See, there are a whole bunch of things that led me to this conclusion. I'm just trying to draw the right path. I don't believe you can love yourself thin. I don't believe you can nurture your inner wounded child back to health and then you're going to stop wanting to overeat. I think that we don't have a disease, or we who get involved with serious overeating or what they would call compulsive overeating, I don't believe it's a disease. I think we have healthy appetites that have been corrupted by industry and for an industrial profit. And I think that there's an anesthetic effect of these foods on the emotions, because if you overload your body with things that aren't supposed to be in there, then it has to focus all its energy on digestion, and therefore it doesn't have the same energy for the nervous system to conduct the emotion. So there is a numbing effect of food, or an escape from feelings. And so there is this really complex relationship, and I could tell you stories to illustrate that if you want me to, but that's not the whole picture. We're also eating to get high. We're eating to get high with food, because we didn't have all these bags and boxes and containers on the savannah. There were no chocolate bars in the tropics. There was no potato chips in the tropics. these are concentrations of hyper-palatable mixtures of salt and sugar and fat and oil and starch and excitotoxins.
Mm-hmm.
And they're engineered to hit our bliss points without giving us the nutrition to make us feel satisfied. And another word for that is a drug, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So the other reason you can't love yourself thin, I figured out, was because the part of the reason I know all this is because I was doing consulting for big food also. I never had children and I didn't commute. So I had a lot of time on my hands to have two careers. Anyway, the part of the brain that's being targeted, it's not the part of the brain that really knows love. It's the reptilian brain. It's the most primitive part of our brain that looks at something in the environment and says, do I eat it? Do I mate with it? Or do I kill it? Eat, mate, or kill. There's no love there. There's no love there. Love exists in the higher parts of the brain, which are capable of delaying the expression of eat, mate, or kill in consideration of whether it's going to impact the people in your tribe, your family, your loved ones, in a positive or negative way. It's capable of instituting that delay to figure out whether it's going to lead you towards or away from your long-term plans, and what does it do for you as a person? How does it affect your contribution to society, your experience of creativity and music and art and the humanities? That's all in the higher parts of the brain, in the like neocortex and the mammalian brain, not in the basal midbrain part of the brain. It's and I'm not a neurologist, and a neurologist could put me to shame in explaining this, but basically that's how it works. And so I started to recognize that the way to get over this, it was not going to be like nurturing a wounded child back to health. It was going to be more like taking control of a bodily organ and letting it know who was in charge. And there are other very strong analogies to this. I mean, think of our reproductive organs and think of our bladders. They both generate very powerful urges, but those urges aren't us. They're a part of our physical being, but they aren't us. And we have to take charge of how they're expressed, otherwise we get in a lot of trouble. You can't run out in the street and kiss attractive people that don't know you. You just can't do it. You'll get in trouble. You can't pee anywhere you want to, no matter how strong the urge is. In our society, you're expected to go and find a bathroom and express yourself in that way. So your bladder says, I'm in control, you better let me go. And you say, no, you're not. I will attend to you, but we're going to do it in a particular way at a particular time. And so I started to look at the urges like that. And this is a kind of embarrassing part of it. Let me just give you one more analogy. It's more like an alpha wolf dealing with a challenger for leadership. So did I say that already? When an alpha wolf is challenged for leadership in the pack, it doesn't say, oh my goodness, somebody needs a hug. It says, get back in the line or I'll kill you. It snarls and it growls and it shows the challenger that it really means business. And that's how the order is maintained in the wolf pack. So I started to think of myself as having this internal wolf pack, and I said, okay, I'm going to have to personify this in some way so I can structure my thinking more clearly. And this is a little embarrassing. This is not something you'd think a sophisticated psychologist would do who has all these credentials and has been on all these media shows and stuff. But this is what I did. And AJ, I never thought I was going to be talking about it publicly. I really thought this was a very private thing. I'll tell you how it got public later on if you want. But I said, first of all, I'm going to draw really clear lines in the sand. I'm going to say something like, I'll never have chocolate on a weekday again. Monday through Friday, chocolate's out. And that, therefore, any thought in my head that suggested I was going to have chocolate on a Wednesday, that I knew was coming from my lizard brain. I decided to name my lizard brain my inner pig. I wish I chose another name. A lot of people were called a pig when they were younger, especially women, and they feel like I'm telling them that they're a pig, and I'm really not. It's just a mental construct. And I actually think that pigs are very sweet animals in the world, and they need our help. They're really being tortured. But this is how I did it myself. And I called my inner lizard brain my pig. I decided that anything it wasn't supposed to eat was pig slop. And if I heard it squealing, like if it was saying, hey, Glenn, you know, you worked out really hard today, even though it's a Wednesday. It's not going to do any harm if you have a little chocolate, a little bit won't hurt. That was pig squeal. And I'd say, my pig is squealing for chocolate. I don't want that. My pig does. I don't eat pig slop, and I don't let farm animals tell me what to do. Mm. And as primitive and crude as that is, it would wake me up at the moment of impulse. And that's what started to give me my power back. It wasn't a miracle. It's not like I had that insight and then all of a sudden I was all better. Mm-hmm. But what was a miracle was that the sense of it being a disease or some type of a irresistible impulse, or like I no longer felt like I was transported into this nether world where I wasn't in control. Because I literally used to have the feeling, and if you talk to a lot of people about overeating, it's almost like they're doing it unconsciously, like they really couldn't help themselves. Mm-hmm. But I realized that I could help myself. And I realized that nobody was going to tell me what to eat. I could make my rules myself. I wasn't, in jail or in an institution or something, so I could make these rules entirely on my own. And over the period of a year or two, I kept a journal about all the things that the pig said and why they were wrong and where the lies were, the logical inconsistencies. And over the course of that year, I got better. My weight had been probably around 280, and I hover around 200 now, between 200 and 210. My triglycerides were up over 1,000, and they're normal now, or always very close to normal. I had psoriasis and eczema, and those are gone. And I have energy. I sleep better. And more importantly, I'm present. I'm here now. I wasn't always here, especially with my patients. I'd be thinking about, how do I get my next pizza? Where do I get the next? And since I've made a lot of those decisions about when and how I eat those things, if I do it all, I've made them beforehand. I don't have to think about it anymore. And I'm free from that mental obsession. So that's the story, and that's how it evolved. And I was a minor partner in a publishing company. I've done a lot of things in marketing over the years in order to learn how to disseminate psychoeducation far and wide, because like I said, I want to help as many people who are sad to be happy as I can. I have a much more sophisticated understanding of it now. But I was part of a publishing company, was a minor partner, and the CEO asked if I could write a book because he wanted to do a marketing experiment so that they could prove they knew what they were doing and have a success story to talk about. And I said, I don't really have time to write a whole book, but I have this journal I've been keeping for 8 years, and it's how I recovered from food addiction. He said, great, I want to read it. He read it. He lost 86 pounds.
Wow.
and he said, we have to publish this. And so we did, and I thought it was going to languish in some dark corner of Amazon, but it took off. And we've got 600,000 copies in distribution, and it's what I do full time now. I help people to not listen to their pigs, not listen to their inner pigs.
Well, we definitely want to talk about this some more, because I do feel that it is a huge thing that goes on with many, many thousands of people. We're going to take a break, though, so when we get back, let's dive into this book, this food journal that you kept, and share it more with our listeners. We are still wandering with Glenn Livingston this evening, and there's still more to come, so be sure to stay close because we will be right back. back to Soul Wanderings. We are here wandering with our guest this evening, Glenn Livingston. And just before we took our first break, Glenn was sharing with us his very own personal journey story. And we ended up getting into how he decided to assist those who had eating addictions, who were overeating or binge eating, through his own personal experience. Glenn, just before we left to the break, you did bring up this book you created from your own personal food journal.
I did. It's called Never Binge Again.
Never Binge Again is the name of the book. This one I'm definitely going to be reading. I was sharing during the break, so many people can relate to binge eating. So many of us do it. And like you said before the break, we also do it on an autopilot. Like we don't even realize how much food we're eating because we're so like it's kind of an outer body thing. We're watching TV, we're shoving food in our mouth, or we're at a party and we just keep eating and eating, or we are having a bad day or a happy day and we're just constantly shoving food in our mouth for whatever emotion. And I don't know one person who can empathize or sympathize with this type of situation. So I'm sure your clientele is massive because this is a book that can relate to all of us.
You know, it's true. What's really interesting is that the people we wind up working with directly for the most part, even though this book will work to help you with that 15 or 20 pounds that you're overeating beyond your own best judgment periodically, we tend to attract the people who had a more serious problem than that. I mean, I spent almost 30 years at the bottom, like going to 7 different drive-thrus so that nobody knew how much I was having, or eating off the floor out of the garbage, or saying I was not going to have any more than going out of the house to go get more. So I really was at the depths, and it felt like food had taken over my life. And because that's my personal story, we tend to attract people like that, but it works just as well for the average person who just wants to lose a little weight or get a little more control. Mm-hmm. One really interesting thing about the book was that originally I thought it was so aggressive it would only appeal to men. And I actually put a big for men only star on the book when I started.
I was going to ask you about that. I saw that copy.
Yeah. But then it turned out that only about 5% of our clients were men. 95% of our clients were women. So I took the big star off. And now I'm surrounded by women that want help to stop overeating. And I feel like I'd like to be able to reach more of the men who are embarrassed to get help. But
I could see why such a large audience would be women, because of not just society, but we're so hard on ourselves in general, probably more so than men, on looking or feeling a certain way.
Women feel the pain of the extra weight more than men do. Mm. It shouldn't be like this, but it is. To a certain extent, it's still socially acceptable for a man to have a bit of a stomach, but it's not necessarily like that for a woman.
Right.
So, yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah. How does that work?
Well, look, AJ, when you and I are running the world, things are going to be different, right?
Yes, absolutely. We will all be equal on some way or another anyway. And in this regards, as far as how we look. So your book exploded. You put it out there and you were saying it's only been 3 years. And how many copies did you say you sold?
There are about 600,000 copies in distribution.
Okay.
Not all sold because we do give away the Kindle Nook or PDF version for free. You can find out about it at the website. But there are about 600,000 copies, and it's often the number one book for weight loss or weight management on the Kindle side. So we're doing really well. We're doing really well. It's to the point that once in a while, people don't know my name. They don't. If they see me in a bookstore or something, they recognize me from a video they saw or something. They don't remember my name. They point at me and they go, "Pig guy, pig guy, pig guy." So that's that's my claim to fame now, is people point at me and call me a pig. So,
so how does that work? I'm sure you've gotten some backlash from, I mean, because that could be taken in more of a crude way than not, just because a lot of people are ultra sensitive, especially when it comes to the pig terminology, if you will.
Well, I make a big deal out of it in the book and when I talk about it, to let people know that you don't have to call it a pig. Most women don't call it a pig inside them. It's just what I call my own personal lizard brain. Most people call it a food demon or a food monster or something like that. And the other thing that I tell people is that the fear of the word pig makes them feel like they're going to degrade their self-esteem. But the truth is that this enhances your self-esteem because it provides you with a way to master your own impulses and you feel like you're more in control. Your esteem naturally rises. And then, of course, if you're more in control of your weight and you're no longer feeling bloated and your digestion is better, then you feel better about yourself also. So, and in some ways, I think the book might be popular because I called it a pig. I think that I think I come off as an authoritative, sophisticated psychologist when I want to, and I've done millions of dollars of consulting for big industry, and I've been in all the New York Times and Los Angeles Times and Crane's New York Business and all these fancy publications. And then I get out there and I say, but I got this pig inside me, see, and I don't eat pig slop. I don't let farm animals tell me what to do. And I think that juxtaposition really stands out. And I think that people pay attention, and that's part of why it's popular. So we thought about changing it, but so many people know it the way that it is, and so many people, there's such a groundswell of momentum with it like that we're just leaving it as it is and apologizing for it.
Well, it seems to be working out just fine.
Yeah.
Seeing how you are a psychologist, and I love the psychology behind different behaviors, I want you to share actually with us more about the psychology end of things, of binging or overeating or emotional eating, stress eating, that type of thing. And okay. You did bring up earlier that, you can't love your inner child or fix your wounds from inside that are causing you to eat. So,
well, you can fix those wounds, but they won't necessarily fix your
eating behaviors.
Yeah. Let me tell you a story that would illustrate this. So, did I tell you about the study that I did with 40,000 people?
I know of it, but you have not shared.
So back in the days when internet clicks were cheap, and I was still struggling, I set up a study where I asked people what foods they craved that they couldn't stop eating once they started, and what areas of their life were they most stressed in, and a bunch of other personality variables. And in that study, I found three things. One of them was that people who struggle with chocolate tended to be lonely or brokenhearted. And that was me. I always started my binges with chocolate, and my marriage was not going so well at that time. And I was pretty lonely and brokenhearted. The people who struggled with crunchy, salty things tended to be stressed at work. And the people who struggled with soft, chewy things like bread or pasta or bagels, they tended to be stressed at home. And I thought what that meant was that, if you struggle with chocolate, then what we need to do is work on, fixing your love life and making you less lonely and working on depression to a certain extent. But before I started working with clients about it, I decided to call my mom and ask her, because she raised me, and I figured she would know more about how the pattern was set up, and she's a psychotherapist also. And I got this reaction I really didn't expect. She said, "Honey, I'm so sorry." And I said, "What?" She said, "I am so sorry, but when you were a toddler, about 1 year old, it was 1965, and your dad was a captain in the Army, and they were talking about sending him to Vietnam, and we were planning another child, and I was afraid I was going to be a single mother of 2 kids, and I was going to lose your dad, and I was terrified. And at the same time, my father, your grandfather, well, he just got out of prison. And I had idolized him my whole life. He was my safety net, my rock. And I realized that he was guilty. He was doing these things. And my whole world fell apart. And I was severely depressed and anxious, and I didn't have good therapy. And I would just sit and stare a lot of the time. And you'd come running up to me, wanting a hug or some love or some healthy food. And instead, I put a bottle of chocolate Bosco syrup in a refrigerator on the floor. And I'd say, Glenn, go get your Bosco. And you'd go crawling over to the refrigerator. You'd open it, you'd take out the bottle, you'd suck on the bottle, and you go into a chocolate sugar coma. Mm. And I thought, wow, well, that's got to be it. That's the pivotal moment. If this were the movies, we'd have a momentous hug and a big cry, and we'd forgive each other, and I'd never struggle with chocolate again. But AJ, you want to know, it actually got worse. I actually started eating more chocolate after that. And the reason is that there was this crazy voice inside me which said something like, hey, Glenn, you know what? You're right. Your mama didn't love you enough. Mm. And she left a great big chocolate-sized hole in your heart. And until you can find the love of your life, you're going to have to go right out and keep binging. Yippee, 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 let's go do it. So it was this voice of justification. So even though I actually did heal from that conversation, it was a good conversation to have. I forgave my mom. I learned a lot more about her. I was able to forgive myself. I wasn't as harsh on myself about my eating after that. And that was important. But the actual chocolate binging got worse because of this voice of justification. And so I came up with this analogy that I think explains it. If you think of the emotions as the fire, I think of a roaring fire in a fireplace. Now, if that fireplace is substantial, then that roaring fire keeps the house warm. And it's a beautiful centerpiece of the house. It's a wonderful place to spend time. It kind of breathes life into a place that otherwise might be lifeless. On the other hand, if there are holes in the fireplace, if it's not substantial enough, then that fire can get out and burn down the house. And so I realized that like all of this talk about emotional eating and trying to fix the emotions, we're trying to put out the fire, and maybe we don't have to put out the fire. Maybe the problem is there's this crazy voice of justification that is poking holes in the fireplace. And it turned out that it's a lot faster to fix those holes in the fireplace and get that voice to stop poking holes in it than it is to put out the fire. And to be more practical about it, finding the love of your life and no longer feeling lonely or brokenhearted is a long-term endeavor. That's not an easy thing to do, right? And I'm actually divorced now and single, and so I don't have it still, but I don't binge on chocolate anymore because I fixed that fireplace, I fixed the container, and I don't fall prey to that crazy voice of justification anymore. Mm. So I tell people that, first of all, we're not just eating for emotional reasons. It's true that when we overload our systems, our digestive systems, with stuff that doesn't belong in there or with too much food, that then energy is diverted in the body and the nervous system doesn't have the ability to conduct the emotions. So there is an anesthetic numbing effect of food on the emotions, but that's not the only reason we're eating. We're also eating to get high with food, because I think we talked about this before. All these things don't really exist in nature. We didn't have chocolate bars on the savannah.
Right.
And that's an important paradigm shift for people to stop saying, I'm just comforting myself. I'm eating to get numb. I'm eating to numb out. That's not the only reason you're eating. You're eating to get high with food. And most people don't want to think of themselves as a drug addict, so that helps them to start paying more attention and thinking twice before they do it. The other thing is that the conclusion that you need to solve your emotional problems first, it's actually erroneous, because you won't solve your emotional problems while you're continually numbing out with food. If you're keeping yourself from having the emotions, you won't expose their original cause to the light of day. You won't build a tolerance for having the emotions. As a matter of fact, you'll develop a phobia for having those emotions, and you'll find that the eating gets worse and worse. So people have it back-asswards when they're saying that they're going to solve all the emotions. I hope I can say that word on the radio. I'm sorry.
You already did.
I hope maybe you have a delay. I'm sorry. But they have it backwards when they're thinking like that. And it's better to solve the practical problems first, let the emotions come to the surface. And any therapist will tell you they'd rather have a client who had the emotions and the thoughts and the feelings and images on the surface so that they could deal with them, and you'll make much more progress. So the other emotional element of binge eating and overeating has to do with how you handle mistakes. And my book is called Never Binge Again. And people say, how can you say that? How can you say you'll never binge again? What if you make a mistake? Aren't you just setting people up to feel too guilty? So it's going to take me a little bit to explain, but it's really important. First of all, let's look at the role of guilt and shame in the human psyche. And I would draw an analogy to the role of physical pain in the body. There are disorders where children are born without the ability to feel physical pain. And we can't keep these children alive past 4 or 5 years old because they don't know where the sharp edges are. They can't be taught to stop hurting themselves. On the other hand, when you touch a hot stove, you need to feel that physical pain for a moment so that you figure out, why did I touch the hot stove and how am I going to avoid that in the future? But you don't want the pain to get stuck inside you. You don't want to feel constant pain about that. You certainly don't want to slam your whole hand down on the stove and say, oh my God, I'm a pathetic hot stove toucher. I might as well just burn the whole thing off. That's obviously not adaptive. And the psychological analogy there would be when people get the guilt and shame stuck inside of them and say, I had that chocolate bar. I'm obviously a pathetic overeater. I might as well just give up and be a happy fat person and eat as much as I can. The perseveration on guilt and shame is a big part of what perpetuates the overeating and binging. You'll find it very difficult to continue binging if you refuse to yell at yourself. For this reason, I tell people that although I want them to commit with perfection, and we'll talk about why that's important in a second, they always need to forgive themselves with dignity. And what that means is as soon as they realize they've made a mistake, they try to start collecting evidence of success. Maybe you had 5 cupcakes instead of 15. Maybe you ate the whole pizza, but you didn't eat the box. Where is it that you're making any progress at all? Maybe the binge was 10,000 instead of 20,000 calories, or maybe it was 1,000 instead of 2,000 calories. Some progress. Maybe you were aware of what was going on sooner. Collect evidence of success, and you're programming your brain to develop a success identity. If you allow yourself to start asking failure questions like, why can't I stop? What you're doing is telling your brain that you wanted to collect evidence of why you can't stop, and you'll find it. And then you'll believe that you can't stop. So forgive yourself with dignity, but you want to commit with perfection. So let's look at that part of the equation. Think of an archer aiming for the bullseye. When they aim for the bullseye, they need to see the arrow going into the bullseye before they let go of the arrow. They're not thinking, maybe I'll make it, maybe I won't. The reason they don't let themselves think that is because that doubt and uncertainty is a tremendous drain on the energy they need to focus on the goal. So the psychology of winning has to do with the ability to purge that doubt and uncertainty from your mind and focus on the bullseye. If they miss the bullseye, they don't shoot all the arrows up in the air and say, I'm a pathetic archer, forget it. They stand up, they ask themselves, what went wrong? How do I adjust? And they aim at the bullseye again. And so I refer to that as committing with perfection, even though you know you will forgive yourself with dignity. The last part of this is, like, how can you say you'll never do something again? How can you say, I will never eat chocolate on a weekday again? What if you make a mistake? Or what if you want to change the rules? What if there's a study that comes out that says 8 ounces of chocolate a day is anti-carcinogenic and everybody needs to be doing that? Do you really want to be boxed into never doing it again? Well, when I say never again, I mean it in a kind of tricky way. When my niece was 2 years old, I told her that she could never, ever cross the street without holding my hand. Never, ever, ever, ever again could she cross the street without holding my hand. The reason I told her that, even though I knew when she was 7 or 8 years old, I'd probably teach her to look both ways, was because at 2 years old, her mind was incapable of even being distracted with the thought or the image of darting into the street by herself. It's too dangerous. I don't want her having those thoughts. I want all of her energy focused on holding my hand and crossing the street safely. Mm. It's the same thing with our inner pigs. They act like 2-year-olds around food. And so we present our rules to them as if they are set in stone. I will never eat chocolate again, or I'll never eat chocolate on a weekday again, even though I know that there might be a time that I change the rule. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. Absolutely.
So there's this whole psychology of committing with perfection and forgiving ourselves with dignity that is hard for people to grasp at first because it's distinct and different from what we're told in our culture. See, in our culture, we're told to use guidelines instead of rules. Anything in moderation, eat well 90% of the time, indulge yourself 10% of the time. The problem with that is that it requires a decision every time you're in front of a tempting food. Every time I'm in front of a chocolate bar at Starbucks, I'd have to ask myself, is this part of the 10% or part of the 90%? The problem with having to make those decisions is that decisions wear down your willpower. It appears as if there may only be so many decisions, so many good decisions we can make on any given day. And so to eat better, we want to minimize our decision making. We want to essentially make as many decisions beforehand before we get into the tempting situation as we can. It's really what we're talking about is building character. When I'm saying I never eat chocolate on a weekday, what I'm really saying is that I've chosen to become the kind of person who doesn't eat chocolate during the week. And character trumps willpower because it eliminates decisions. And we are inherently used to developing character without even knowing it. So for example, and if you want to interrupt and ask me a question, I'm really happy to do that. But suppose you walk into a diner and you sit down at the table and the waitress says, I'll be right back, I just have to get you a menu. And you happen to notice that there's a crisp $10 bill on the table because the waitress didn't see her tip from the last table. And there's nobody up front. There's no window. There's no video camera. Nobody would see you take the $10 bill. Virtually everybody that I ask in this situation says, well, there's no way I would take it. And I'll say, why? It would benefit you. It would be pleasurable. It would be better for your situation. Nobody would know. And they'll say, well, that woman worked hard for her money and I'm not a thief. And I'll say, so as a matter of character, you've adhered to an unwritten rule. You've incorporated an unwritten rule into your character. I never steal. I will never steal again, no matter whether I get caught or not. Mm. Right? And they'll say yes. And I say, so it's not a matter of willpower. There's no decision to be made. And they'll say yes. I say, well, why can't you do that with food? And it turns out that you can. You can make character rules for yourself and eliminate a lot of these decisions around your worst trigger foods and behaviors. And it turns out that once you do that and suddenly your inner enemy becomes really clear to you, you can hear that voice, and then you can choose to be the kind of person you want to be.
Your mind is such a powerful tool, isn't it?
It really is.
I want to talk about that because you make it sound so simple, and I know a lot of people will say, it can be that easy. But there are a lot of people who will say it's too hard and I can't just change my mind like that. But of course, we're going to take a break first. So we'll do that. And when we return, we'll continue to wander with our guest, Glenn Livingston, about his book and his experiences with binging. To Soul Wanderings, which is heard here on kgraradio.com, as well as many other platforms for your convenience, such as iTunes, TalkStream Live, iHeartRadio, and Spreaker, to name a few. So wherever you are joining us from tonight, welcome. I'm happy to have you here wandering with us this evening. We've been visiting with Glenn Livingston, the author of Never Binge Again, and we're halfway through our wandering and have the opportunity for another hour with Glenn. Remember, if you guys have questions, hop over to the chat room and ask away. Make sure you type in all caps and I'll be sure to grab them. Glenn, just before the break, those breaks, they always get us a little off topic. But you were talking about committing to perfection and collecting moments of success, character rules. So I was saying that your mind is such a powerful tool, but for those who struggle with changing the thoughts in their mind or making those big commitments to thinking differently, what would you recommend to them? How would you get them to begin?
Well, I'd recommend that you recognize that you're of two minds. That if it feels difficult, it's because there's the part of you that wants to and the part of you that doesn't. And that the essence of this technique is to try to separate that. And I'd recommend that you start small. So think of a trigger food or eating behavior that's troubling for you, that's getting you into some trouble, which would make a big difference if you revised. But then don't try to set it up so that you're going to lose a lot of weight really fast. That's dangerous in and of itself. I'll tell you why in a minute. But try to just figure out how to play this game first. What you want to do is be able to hear those two different minds. You want to hear your upper brain and your lower brain. And the way you do that is by making one rule. And it could be something really simple like, I always put my fork down between bites. That's not such a hard thing to do, right? It just gets you to be a little more mindful. It brings you into the present moment with the food. It inserts a natural pause, helps you to get out of the fight or flight mentality, activates your parasympathetic nervous system, and that's the part of you that calms you down, tells you there's no emergency here. I always put my fork down between bites. And once you commit with perfection about that and say, I will always put my fork down between bites, I'll never eat 2 bites in a row without putting my fork down again, then you should be able to start to hear that other part of you that says, yeah, right, like you have time for that. Or, you could just start with that tomorrow. Or that's not going to make a difference. Why do you think that's going to make a difference? Nothing else has. Or, this is pathetic. This is a stupid game. Why are you even trying? Whatever that negative part of your mind says that's trying to get you to forget about the rule, just start to identify and recognize it and say, oh, that's not me. That's my food monster. That's not me. That's my food monster. And do this for a couple of weeks and just allow yourself to get the hang of these two different parts of you. And if you only have the goal of recognizing it to start with, even if you decide to listen to it, eventually you'll realize that you're actually deciding to listen to it. And when you recognize that you're deciding to listen to it, you realize you have the choice not to. and you'll experiment with not listening to it. And that's the very beginnings of reclaiming your power. And you won't necessarily lose weight. It's not going to be a miraculous transformation. What will happen is you'll begin to trust yourself. You'll say, I have the power to make a rule and decide who I want to be. I have the power to remake myself. And that pierces a hole in the despair and sense of hopelessness that develops among people that have been struggling with overeating for a long time. They start to reclaim their power. Once you have that, then add another rule that will make it possible for you to eat a little healthier. So, maybe I always start my meals with a quarter pound of salad. And no matter what else you're having, you're going to have a quarter pound of salad. You're necessarily going to have a little less processed, unhealthy food. And you're going to wind up having a little fewer calories in that meal. And probably it's going to edge on the difference. And then ramp it up a little bit as you go along. Then you can say, okay, I think part of the problem is that I'm just having way too much fat. I'm eating way too much cheese. So let's say I'm only going to have 2 ounces a day. And then you'll play the game with that rule. And you just progress with this until you feel like you're eating the way that you want to eat. And don't worry about losing weight quickly unless your doctor says you have to lose it quickly for an operation or some medical emergency. But otherwise, direction is a lot more important than speed. And if things are getting better, then they should continue to get better. And you can calm yourself down and just kind of relax into that state of mind. And that's how I'd recommend that people do it. It's kind of like, it's not hard as in difficult, or it's not hard as in confusing. Like overcoming overeating, in my estimation, is much simpler than it's made out to be. You don't have to contemplate your navel and meditate by the river for years. Might be a nice thing to do anyway, but you don't have to do that to stop overeating. You don't have to figure out why your mother didn't love you. You don't have to do that. You don't have to find the love of your life. You just have to define what it means and very gradually focus on these very practical rules and all the things in your head that say that you can't do it. And the other thing you need to know about overcoming overeating is that people that eat beyond their own best judgment, especially if they binge eat, they're usually very good dieters also. They'll go through periods where they lose a bunch of weight pretty quickly, and then they'll bounce all the way back and worse. And the reason for that is that you're not just addicted to the binge eating, feasting part of the cycle, you're actually addicted to the famine diet part of the cycle as well. And they both keep your body in a kind of state of emergency. You're revved up, your fight or flight response is somewhat active, and you're perceiving that the world is not safe. There's no regular, reliable source of calories and nutrition available for you. And so the solution to this is not, for example, if you binge one day and you have, 2 whole pizzas or something, the solution is not to fast for 4 days, because that's just going to make you want to binge again. The solution is to eat regularly and normally for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, whatever it takes to make up for that. So you want to be authentically caring for your body no matter what. You don't want to make any rules that restrict your food too much. You want to always be checking with a nutritionist or a dietitian, or even just one of the online nutrition calculators like Chronometer is one of my favorites. And making sure that I don't like people to be losing more than a pound or 2 a week. I want to make sure that they're not really missing out on any major nutrients. And if you regularly and reliably nutrify your body and you don't let yourself lose weight too quickly, as painful as it might be, sometimes people are 100 or more pounds overweight and they just feel like it's intolerable to be that weight. They have to get it off quick. And I tell them that losing 100 pounds is a very scary task to think about, but losing 1 pound 100 times is really easy. So just lose 1 pound 100 times. If you do that and you ask yourself, what does your body authentically need, and you keep it nourished, then the sense of panic and desperation goes away, and you'll get it. You'll get it. You'll be okay. If you insist on keeping yourself in the feast and famine cycle, then it's very, very hard to stop overeating, because if your brain thinks that you go through periods of time when calories and nutrition are not available, then it must also think that as soon as they are available, you better hoard them. And that's why that's the only reason I can think of why feeling full could be a trigger to overeat more. A lot of people will say they have to be careful not to feel too full, because then they really want to go to town. And I think that's because it's the signal to the brain that, oh my God, food is finally available. You better get all you can. So we want to step out of that cycle. We want to signal our bodies that we're in a very plentiful harvest all the time.
It really is about taking baby steps so that they're manageable and long-term, and taking your power back and not allowing whatever the addiction is, in this case food, to control you.
Yeah.
It really is a mindset.
You can take it back, and if you really don't believe that, there's a lot of mythology in our culture that says that you can't. But if you don't believe that, there are books you can read about why addiction is a choice, and you can look at the actual evidence.
So we did have a question from the chat room. I think it's a fantastic question. What do you think, or why do you think obesity is such a common problem for the youth?
Well,
and how do they change that? They're so young,
Well, it's actually easier to change when you're young. People are more malleable. They're less set in their ways. At any point in life, we can remake ourselves. I think, AJ, given your profession and all the people that you've helped, and all the people that I've sat with, I can tell you that as long as there's breath in your body, you can remake yourself. You can wake up any day and decide that you want to be a different person. And not that it's so simple, but you can set out on that path and make that happen. So why do I think the youth have so much difficulty? Well, they were raised in an era of very advanced advertising. And they were raised in an era where the chemicals and addictive nature of food has developed to a much greater point. And they're raised in an era when the message and the mythology of the addiction treatment industry is rampant. And so, did I tell you about the animal studies on short-circuiting the pleasure mechanism in the brain?
No, I'd love to hear about it.
So this actually goes way back to the 50s and 60s. And the reason I'm saying that is that I think that our pleasure mechanisms are being short-circuited. I don't think we had, chocolate bars and potato chips on the savannah. I think evolution didn't prepare us to deal with that level of concentrated pleasure. If you look at what happens in animal studies when the pleasure centers are overridden, when they're unnaturally stimulated, and the way they did this was they started with rats and they went to higher mammals, I think even humans. They inserted electrodes into the pleasure center of the brain, and then they wire those electrodes to a lever that the rats could push to self-stimulate. And they would push those buttons thousands of times per day. That's all they wanted to do. You could take a starving rat, give it food, but then also give it access to that lever, and it would ignore its food until it starved to death. It would just press the lever thousands of times per day. You could take a nursing mother rat, and she would abandon her nursing pups. So think about how strong the impulse to be a good mother is. And she would abandon them.
That's incredible.
Go on, AJ, I'm sorry.
I was just saying, that's incredible. That just blows my mind.
The survival drive is hijacked. When you short circuit the pleasure center, you are hijacking the survival drive. You're telling the brain that this is what you need to survive. You need my, big bag of chips. You need my big box of tarts. This is what you need to survive, not, fruits and vegetables. You need this to survive. And so what we have today, I don't think anybody's putting electrodes in our brains, but I think you can make an argument there are chemical electrodes. I think when you look at how these foods are engineered, and when in most cities today you could walk out of a McDonald's and see a Burger King across the street, I think that you could argue that we have those pleasure buttons. And most people, their survival drive has been hijacked to one level or another. And they don't like fruit and vegetables as much as they used to. Some of them don't like them at all. And so that's why it's so hard for the youth to eat well today. But the good news is that our brains are very resilient. And so there's a phenomenon called downregulation and upregulation in the nervous system and with the taste buds. And in plain English, what that means is that if I give you a chocolate bar every day, at the end of the month, an apple is not going to taste that sweet to you because your tongue and your brain has been overstimulated by a concentration of sweet and pleasure that's way stronger than the apple is. As a matter of fact, if you keep going, at some point you get to the point where you feel like the chocolate just to feel normal. You feel like you need the chocolate just to feel normal. Your nervous system and your taste buds have down-regulated. The same way that when I slept underneath the subway in graduate school, there was no way I thought I was ever going to sleep at first, but 2 weeks later I couldn't even hear it. It's because my nervous system habituated it, down-regulated. It said, this stimulus is plentiful in the environment. I don't have to pay as much attention to it anymore. I'm not going to respond as much as I was. Now, your pig will tell you that that means you can never give up chocolate or regulate it, so have it once a week or something like that, or just have an ounce a day. You can't do that because you're going to feel too deprived. You won't feel normal. You won't feel any pleasure at all. But it's not true because there's also a phenomenon of upregulation. If you stop having the chocolate bar every day and you eat apples instead, yeah, they're not going to taste good at first, but 2-3 weeks later, you're going to start to crave that apple. You're going to be able to taste subtle flavor differences. And like at this point in my own life, I really enjoy the subtle distinction between an envy apple, a gala apple, and a delicious apple.
I couldn't agree more.
Right?
Yes, I love the different flavors.
Nature has a lot to offer, but it's been masked by this world of overstimulation. And we think that the overstimulation is normal, and we think that the flavors of nature are boring. And what you need to do to get through that is tell yourself, feelings aren't facts. It's okay that everybody and every bone in my body thinks this apple is normal. It's okay that there's this voice screaming loud in my head that this doctor is full of SH and that, there's no way I'm ever going to like an apple more than a chocolate bar. Mm-hmm. You don't have to believe me. You just have to try it. If you try it for long enough, what if I'm right? What if 100 hours from now, things were going to start to get better? What if 2 months from now, you were going to be enjoying fruits and vegetables and not feel addicted to, flour and sugar and alcohol? Mm. What if that were really possible? Isn't it worth a try? So I forgot how we got there. I think it was about children.
It was about the children and the obesity in our youth, yes.
Yeah. People ask me a lot about how to work with kids. We're actually in the middle of writing Never Binge Again for Kids. And the first thing I'll tell you is that kids will do 80% of what you do and 20% of what you say. So just telling them how to eat healthy is not going to do it. So the first thing you need to realize is that you have to solve this for yourself first. You can't tell them to do what you say and not what you do. Children just, especially in their teenage years, they just don't work like that.
Right.
But the second thing that's really good about kids is you control their environment more than you think you do. And you can start to make them healthier alternative of things which they won't necessarily even recognize the difference. For example, if you blend up a whole bunch of ripe bananas with a whole bunch of spinach, it tastes and put some non-alkalized cocoa in there, it tastes like a chocolate milkshake. And you can once in a while try giving your kids that milkshake instead of a regular milkshake and see what they say. And you can kind of trick them and get them moving in that direction in some ways. In other ways, they'll call you a bluff a million miles away. And my partner Yoav, who, like I told you, he lost 86 pounds when he read my book, he tells me that his son came up to him and said, "Dad, how did you do that?" He didn't preach to his son at all the whole time that it was happening. He just focused on taking the weight off himself, really getting into control. And his son really wanted to know. And so he sat him down and they talked for 2 hours and they came up with a rule for him to follow. And, your success can spread in that way. But, it takes a little time. It takes a little time to do that. So,
right. It comes on, the weight does come on pretty fast. It definitely takes a lot longer to get yourself clean from the weight, and the addiction for sugar and bread and whatever it looks like for you.
Well, and it takes a little time to convince your children that you mean business and that you're happier, and they'll be happier too if they eat better.
What do you think about not just training your brain in the way that you've shared, but also sharing with other people that this is something that you're working on, and so that they're also holding you accountable?
You're going to think my answer is kind of funky to that, but I find that accountability doesn't work with food addiction. It might work to get you started. It might get you over the first week or so. But the problem with accountability is that your inner pig will work really hard to beat the other person. Like maybe they're not available for the phone call they promised you at 10 o'clock. And you say, okay, now we can binge. Or maybe you see them have some potato chips and they say, oh, that person's less than perfect, so why are we listening to them? And it's a way to abdicate yourself of responsibility and power. So I think that it's fine to, in some ways, as a set of training wheels to get an accountability partner and get things started. But ultimately and fairly quickly, you want to take responsibility yourself. Otherwise, it just becomes one of those exercises that works for a little while and then leaves you worse off than when you started.
Great answer. I have more questions for you, but we're going to take our last break for the evening. And when we return, we're going to hear more from you and your book, Never Binge Again.
Sure thing.
back to Soul Wanderings on KGRAradio.com. I'm AJ Rasmussen. Our guest this evening is Dr. Glenn Livingston, the author of Never Binge Again. It's been quite a fascinating topic about overeating and binging. You've given quite an amount of information to us. Thank you so much for everything that you have shared. There are tons of questions we can still go over, but I do have a question from the chat room. How has people with these types of problems that we've been discussing, how has helping these people affected you? And has it had any negative effects on you?
That is an excellent question. That's a very insightful question. I want to give that person a gold star. I originally was very frightened of that. And one of the reasons that I held back from releasing this as a book was that I was scared that it was going to push me back into my own binge eating, because now I'd be facing everybody else's pig and as opposed to just my own pig. But what actually happened was the opposite. I train and certify coaches too. And I tell them this because most people, as they're coming in, they have a similar fear. The reason that it made me stronger was because when you're listening to someone else's pig, whether they follow their rule or not doesn't have a physical impact on your body. So you're not going to experience the pleasure they're going to experience if they eat the cheese doodles, and you're not going to experience the pain they eat afterwards. You're not going to experience the deprivation they feel if they don't eat them, and all of that. And so it allowed me to see things much more objectively, much more factually. And by constantly being exposed to thousands of different squeals, I got to the point where I felt like there's no rationalization that anyone has that can fool me anymore. So there's, because once you beat one rationalization of your own pig, then it tries to come up with another one. But when you've talked to 1,000 pigs and you've heard every last excuse, what else can your pig say? So I feel like I've nailed the pig into the cage, just can't get out, given all the people that I've talked to, and then the level of emotional release that these people have and the depth of inspiration that they feel when you take the thorn out of their paw. They're just so incredibly grateful, and I feel so inspired every session. Every time I get someone over, it's hard work, because these pigs fight back.
Right.
But once I get people over that and they say, oh my God, this is really possible. Oh my God, I was ruining my life in so many ways by eating all this stuff. And, you just took the stone out of my paw and now I can actually go back to living my life. I can't think of any better work. It's just, I don't have kids, right? So I'm not leaving a legacy in that way in the world. And in the absence of this kind of work, I feel like my life wouldn't be as meaningful. So it has a tremendously positive impact on me. And I thought it was going to be negative. I thought I had to be afraid of it, but I didn't.
And you aren't. You aren't afraid of it. And in fact, you're embracing it. Quite lovely.
Bring it on. Bring it on. Yeah.
You're ready for more. In fact, you did say you'll be writing another book, Never Binge Again, for kids. So you're going to be adding on to this legacy you're leaving with us.
Well, if we could make a mark in childhood obesity, if that was the purpose of my life, I think I'd be happy.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll just set a great foundation for them for living a longer, healthier life. Definitely.
Yeah.
So talk to me, this is more on the negative side for sure, but we talk about our mind being a powerful tool. What about those times where we do fail or that we beat ourselves up because we didn't do what we told ourselves we wouldn't do? or we did do opposite. Do you know what I'm saying? How do we work through those emotions and not going back to negative thinking behavior?
Well, the piercing insight is that the negative commentary is intended to get you to binge more. Once you recognize that, it's hard to indulge it because you believe that you're taking the negative commentary as punishment so you won't do it again. But the truth is just the opposite. And once people really get that, once they really say, oh my God, this just makes me want to binge more, then they are likely to put a stop to that and forgive themselves more quickly. The other thing you need to do is to recognize that you've put your body in a state of emergency. And so there are some physical things. I'm not a medical doctor, and so I just have to give the caveat that you need permission first, and this is just education. But my understanding is that you need to take care of that state of emergency in order to help overcome the intense cravings that are going to be generated after that. When you eat sugar, for example, you get a high for about 18 minutes, but you've then destabilized your blood sugar chemistry, and you're going to crash for a couple hours, unless you have more sugar. And so your body is physiologically going to be pushing to bring more sugar in until you stabilize that blood chemistry. And so I've found that if people don't have any medical reasons why they can't have leafy green vegetables, if they could take like a half a pound of leafy greens and put them in a blender with some distilled water and blend it up and drink it down like medicine, don't try to make it into a salad or something like that, just drink it down like medicine, that you're starting to give your body something to move the pig slop through your system, to alkalinize the system. And more importantly, see, let's say you had a box of Pop-Tarts, which was my thing. Well, if you have that half pound of greens right after that, you're telling your body, okay, I know your survival drive thinks that it wants more Pop-Tarts now, but really it needs more greens, and here's how the greens feel. And so you're reorienting your survival drive back where it needs to go. That will take some of the mental pressure off. So it's not a purely mental trick. You have to take care of your body. Then drinking enough water makes a difference to move things through. Trying to get some light movement, like some very light exercise for about a half an hour, probably an hour or two after the binge, should help things to start moving through. Don't purge, no matter what. Don't purge. None of what I said at all today will work if you allow yourself to purge, because then your pig will say, it doesn't matter, we can get away with it because we've got this special trick that fixes everything. So nothing in the Never Binge Again system works if you allow yourself to purge.
Which is an entire different monster in itself.
Yeah. I mean, I was never, I guess I was exercise bulimic, but I was never able to put my finger down my throat to throw up. I tried. And so I didn't really develop this system to solve bulimia. Nevertheless, there are some people that use it, and they're always trying. But I always give the warning that, look, it wasn't intended for that. It's not intended for anorexia. It's intended to restore normal eating. So I suppose if people make rules that make sure they have enough, then it could help with anorexia. But I don't put it forth as a treatment, and I don't put it forth as being able to diagnose, treat, or cure any disease, disorder, or condition. This is just my crazy system. This is just the thing that worked for me. And, the psychological evidence is mounting that this type of intervention is effective, but I don't want to claim that yet. So,
but it is helping a lot of people. You help a lot of people overcome.
I do.
With your way of doing things.
I really do. I really do.
So do you help them create a food plan, or do you recommend a certain way of eating, like being a vegetarian or a vegan or anything like that?
I don't. I don't know. If I did, then people's pigs would say, well, that doctor is crazy. They would try it for a little while and then say, well, that's not going to work because his diet is crazy.
Right.
I believe that a big part of what happens in binge eating is that people are rebelling. They're rebelling against authority, and they feel like their autonomy has been taken from them, and they don't want anyone to tell them what to eat. And so I don't tell people what to eat. I just support them to eat what they believe is healthy. Now, I have to agree that it's reasonably healthy. So I have had people come to me and say, I want you to help me not eat at all. And I'm sorry, I said, you can't make a rule like that, just like you can't make a rule that says, I will never pee again. Your bladder is going to tell you otherwise eventually. And, maybe I can refer you to an eating disorders unit or something, because you're going to have to eat. You can't, I know people get to the point. I empathize with the fact that people are afraid of any food because they seem to overeat anything. But you have to eat. You can't not eat. So no, I don't push people on any particular diet. As a matter of fact, one of the things I want to give people at the end is a place where they can get a bunch of food plan starter templates, regardless of what philosophy they have. So whether they're, ketogenic or high carb or point counters or calorie counters or macrobiotic or vegan, there is a set of rules that can start with and modify for themselves. But I call them starter templates because I'm not taking responsibility for what you put in your mouth.
We've talked about binging, and everyone has their own definition of binging. But for you, what do you consider a binge? Like if they're going to just take a bite extra over being full, or an entire second helping, or what does that look like for you?
Well, if people are eating beyond their own best judgment consistently, then I think it's a problem worth addressing. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I could tell you what the DSM-5 criteria are for binge eating, or you could just look it up. But I find that that's not a productive exercise because people are trying to see whether they cross this black or white line. And the truth is that if you listen to an interview like this all the way through, probably this would be helpful to you. Even if it's just to get a little more control, probably this would be helpful. So who cares whether someone else would call it a binge or not? Now, as a semantic definition, when you're on the Never Binge Again system, I take a lot of heat for this, but I still feel very adamantly about it. I believe that a bullseye on an archery target needs to have a very clear line around it so that you know when you hit it and when you missed it. So I would say that a binge is one bite off of your carefully constructed food plan. However, that doesn't mean that if you take one bite off of your carefully constructed food plan, that you're supposed to go eat everything in sight because now all bets are off. It just means that you missed the bullseye by a little bit and you get up and you aim again. Just like if you accidentally chip a tooth, you don't go get a hammer to bang the rest of them out. It's just a mistake and you get up and do it again.
I like the way you look at that. What about like the holidays or social gatherings? How would you recommend someone handle those types of situations when they're like pressuring you to have that piece of birthday cake because they'd get offended if you didn't?
What I would recommend, well, we can talk about social situations and social pressure separately, but most people have a set of rules that they follow in ordinary everyday life when they're under control of their food resources and the environment. And they might have another set of rules that they follow when they're in a restaurant or a family party. And you could think of it like the second rung on the archery target, which also has a clear beginning and end. What that might look like is, I never eat bread unless I'm at a restaurant, in which case I allow myself to have 2 pieces and no more, but no more than twice per calendar week. So what have I done there? I've allowed a little flexibility for a condition that requires it. And I have also made all of the decisions beforehand so that when I'm in the environment where there's more temptation and social pressure, I don't have to wear down my willpower with more decisions. I've already made the decisions beforehand. Then there's the question of how do you deal with the social pressure? How much time do I have, AJ? Do I have 2 minutes to describe this, or are we
Oh,
running
yeah,
out?
definitely. Yeah. You have about 6, 7 more minutes.
Okay, so what you need to understand about social pressure, most people understand that other people feel uncomfortable if you're not eating the way that they are,
Mm-hmm.
and that, they want to eat what they want to eat and they don't want to feel bad about it themselves. And so there's that psychological dynamic. What they don't understand is that there's a lot more going on there. And if you think about the way that tribes developed around food, specifically about how warring tribes would break bread and share a meal together in order to indicate that they were no longer at war. And so when, the member of the warring tribe would come to share the meal, if they refused to break bread, there was a fear that that person might be there to rape and pillage rather than become an ally. And so there's actually a threat to the fabric of the society. There's a threat to the fabric of the tribe. So a refusal to break bread with someone, to eat exactly like they're eating, is perceived as a deeper threat to their emotional security than you think on the surface. Then there's the fact that a lot of the foods that developed with dense sources of calories, they originally developed because we couldn't, when armies were conquering larger and larger swaths of territory, they couldn't feed the supply lines. They couldn't keep supply lines long enough to feed their armies that were 500 miles away. They couldn't carry enough fruits and vegetables. So we needed denser, lighter sources of calories. And so that's, part of why we started to rely on grains and, other types of dense source of sugars and dense source of calories. And that the government would integrate that into society so that people felt like it was normal to eat that kind of thing. And if you were threatening that, you're actually threatening society itself. So if you refuse to eat these dense sources of calories that your mother gives you at Christmas or New Year's, or, in the restaurant says, hey, split a dessert with me, then on some level, you're threatening the fabric of society like that also. And then there's just the normal desire to, in group psychology, we have these things called aggregates, and then we have groups. An aggregate is how people relate to one another in an elevator. You walk into an elevator, people keep their distance. They look down, they don't look at each other, they're not really talking to each other. If that elevator were to get stuck for 2 hours, they would eventually start talking together, and they would start to bond, and group norms would develop, and they would feel like a little tribe. Mm-hmm. Well, every time that you're away from your family, you move a little bit more towards being an aggregate than a group. I mean, there are all the memories and loving bonds to make it easier to get back. But part of what the reunion is about is reestablishing the groupness and the cohesiveness of the group, rather than the crust that has developed, the coldness from being apart. So part of developing that groupness is the sharing of food. So it's like your mom wants to love you back into the tribe by giving you this gift. And if you offer her an alternative gift that she can give you, then you don't have to yield to that social pressure. So you could say, Mom, I had a little bit too much at lunch. Do you have any mint tea? My stomach's a little upset. See, and then you've given her a way to love you back into the tribe, and now you're not having a conversation about whether chocolate is good for you or not, or, come on, a little won't hurt you. Mm-hmm. Now it's, oh, sure, honey, let me get you some mint tea. So that's how you do it.
Very sneaky.
Yeah, part of my evil plan.
Yeah. I don't know if I would call it evil. Definitely it's a great plan. You have most definitely shared a ton of great information for us. And I already know that a lot of people are inspired by what you have shared, and even had a comment that you deserve to sell 1 million books. You're so great. So,
well, aren't they sweet? Thank you.
Speaking of books, I do want to give you the opportunity to share with others on how they can get in contact with you, learn more about your book, or how to even get the book. And I did check out your blog. Let's talk about your blog as well.
Okay. Well, you'll get to everything if you go to neverbingeagain.com and you click on the big red button and you sign up for the reader bonus list. And the first thing you'll get is a copy of the book in Kindle, Nook, or PDF format. I'll also give you links to the paperback and Audible versions if you're interested in that. There is a small fee for that, but you can get it for free in Kindle, Nook, or PDF format. You'll get the food plan starter templates that we talked about. You'll get a set of free recorded coaching sessions so you can see how this works in reality, in practice, as opposed to in theory. It can sound a little harsh or intimidating. He just got this psychologist on who's got a pig inside him, and I don't know about this guy. But if you listen to me coaching people, you'll hear them move from despair and desperation and a sense of powerlessness and hopelessness to hope and enthusiasm and power. And I want you to hear that because it will give you hope and like new confidence that you can make changes that you haven't made before. We do a whole bunch of other things. We have they're the free things that we do. We do have a podcast, which you'll get to once you sign up for that list. And I will often do demonstrations on the podcast. I will interview people like AJ. As a matter of fact, AJ, maybe you can come on my podcast sometime. We've got 20,000 listeners. Maybe not as big as you, but we're getting there. And so you might want to hear that. And then we have a forum. We have a readers forum that you can interact with thousands of other like-minded people who are taken with this philosophy and trying to implement it in their life. So it's all on neverbingeagain.com. Click the big red button. Oh, I guess the last thing is if you need to contact me directly, you can reply to one of the emails that you get after you sign up for the reader bonuses, and that will get to me eventually too. And then we do have paid coaching programs and even a paid Become a Coach program if you want to train and certify with us to use this method in your own practice. So it's all at neverbingeagain.com.
That would be fun to become a coach for Never Binging Again. That's something that you offer, huh?
Yeah, and some people actually do it just to be immersed in the community because we have meetings 5 times a week online and little webinars and audio conferences, and we have a lot of practice sessions, and it's actually a way that you can master the process for yourself in addition to learning how to do it for other people. But it's one of my favorite parts of my week when I'm teaching that. And if you want to read directly about that, that's at becomeaweightlosscoach.com. But I'd recommend you go first through some of the free stuff at neverbingeagain.com, and it'll take you there.
Wonderful. That is so great. I love how you offer so many free things. So there are no excuses. Anybody can get on your website and participate and make a change in their lives right now.
My mission is to help 1 million people a year stop binge eating. That's my mission.
Well, I love what you're doing. I love how you're assisting people in the world to be a better version of themselves. I appreciate you and your time tonight. It's been such a joy to have you on here. I learned a lot. You've inspired me, and I know that I have a whole chat room of people who would agree. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next week, we are wandering with my pal, Rob Barnes. He is an astrologer. He also was a past guest when Soul Wanderings was a podcast, and I thought it might be time to bring him back just in time for Valentine's Day to give us a little bit of love astrology and horoscopes forecast for all of us. And you can be single and enjoy it too. I promise. He's so good at what he does. So make sure you guys tune in next week, Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and wander with us once more. Another evening of wandering. It's so good. Thank you for spending time with myself and our guest, Glenn Livingston, this evening. Find more information about Soul Wanderings at soulwanderings.com. And you can connect to all of the social media platforms there. I hope you guys have been and continue to learn each week as we share space together, and that you all feel comforted and supported in knowing that you are not alone through this human journey. We are all divinely connected and loved. Happy day, Wanderers.